The lights at the stadium in El Paso didn't just dim that night. They seemed to breathe. A quiet ripple moved through the crowd, the kind that only happens when tens of thousands of people feel something at the exact same time. It wasn't loud yet, not explosive, not chaotic. It was anticipation, thick, almost tangible, like the air itself was waiting. Backstage, everything was motion. Staff moved quickly but precisely, headsets buzzing with last-minute cues, the low hum of preparation filling every corner. And yet, in the middle of all that urgency, there was a stillness that didn't belong to the chaos. Jimin stood near the edge of the curtain, not performing yet, not speaking, just standing. From where he was, he could hear the crowd faintly chanting, voices blending into something distant and warm. His in-ears rested loosely around his neck, his mic already secured, his stage outfit catching the low backstage lights and soft reflections. To anyone passing by, he looked ready, composed, professional. But if you looked a little closer, there was something else. His gaze wasn't on the stage, it wasn't on the staff, it wasn't even on the mirror just a few feet away. It was somewhere behind him. And then, almost like instinct, he turned. Not quickly, not dramatically, just a small movement, almost unnoticeable in the middle of everything. But it was enough. Because, standing just a few steps away, was Jungkook. Leaning slightly against a case of equipment, one hand resting casually at his side, the other adjusting the strap of in-ear monitor. His head was tilted down for a moment, focused, like he was running through something in his mind. And then, almost as if he felt it, he looked up. Their eyes met. It didn't last long. A second, maybe less. But something in that moment didn't move with time the way everything else did. The noise backstage didn't disappear, but it blurred. The urgency didn't stop, but it softened. Because in that single glance, there was no performance, no cameras, no expectations, just recognition. Jimin's lips curved slightly, not a full smile, not something meant for the audience, something quieter. Something real. And Jungkook responded the same way, the corner of his mouth lifting just enough to mirror it. No words were exchanged. They didn't need to be. A staff member passed between them seconds later, calling out a timing cue. The spell broke, or at least it seemed to from the outside. Jimin turned back toward the stage, rolling his shoulders once as if resetting himself. Jungkook straightened up, stepping forward, ready. And just like that, they were back to being performers. But something had already happened. Something small, something easy to miss, and somehow, something impossible to forget. The lights at the stadium exploded into life moments later, flooding the stadium in waves of color. The opening beats hit hard, reverberating through the ground, through the seats, through every person in the crowd. The cheers followed instantly, loud, overwhelming, electric. Jimin stepped out first. Every movement was precise, every expression controlled, every step in sync with the music that seemed to pulse through him. He was fully in it now, every inch the performer the world knew. Jungkook joined seconds later. The energy shifted. Not because one was stronger than the other, but because together, something changed. It always did. Their formations aligned, their choreography weaving in and out of each other seamlessly. To anyone watching casually, it was perfect execution. Clean lines, sharp transitions, professionalism at its peak. But fans who had watched them for years saw more. There were moments, small, fleeting, where timing stretched just a fraction longer than necessary, where proximity lingered just a second too much, where glances happened not because they were choreographed, but because they wanted to happen. Halfway through the set, during a transition between songs, the stage dimmed briefly. It was one of those in-between moments when performers usually reset, catch their breath, prepare for the next sequence. Jimin turned. Again. This time it was faster, less subtle, like he already knew where to look. And there Jungkook was, already looking back. This time, the eye contact held longer. Not dramatically, not enough for someone unfamiliar to immediately point it out, but long enough. Long enough that the air between them felt intentional. Jungkook nodded once, barely noticeable. Jimin exhaled, a soft laugh escaping him as he looked down for a split second before lifting his gaze again. The lights came back, the music dropped, and the moment vanished into performance once more. Somewhere in the crowd, a fan screamed, not just out of excitement, but out of recognition, because they saw it. Not the choreography, not the stage effects, but that look. That connection, that almost invisible thread that seemed to pull them toward each other, even in the middle of something as massive as a stadium concert. Phones were already up, recording everything. Clips would later be slowed down, zoomed in, replayed over and over again. Fans would dissect every frame, every angle, every micro-expression. But in real time, it wasn't analysis, it was feeling. As the night went on, the performances grew more intense. The energy climbed higher, the crowd louder, the stage brighter. Sweat, lights, movement, it all blurred into something larger than any individual moment. And yet, somehow, those small glances kept happening. During a high-energy track, when the choreography required them to pass each other in opposite directions, Jungkook's hand brushed lightly against Jimin's. It could have been accidental, it should have been, but Jimin's reaction came just a fraction too late for that. A slight pause, a quick inhale, a glance back. Jungkook didn't turn, but the faintest smile appeared. Later, during a softer segment, when the lights dimmed into warmer tones and the music slowed into something more emotional, Jimin stood closer to the front of the stage. His voice carried clearly, smooth and steady, but there was something softer in it tonight, something that felt less like performance and more like presence. Jungkook stood a few steps behind him at first, watching. Not the crowd, not the cameras, just Jimin. There was no choreography requiring it, no direction telling him to stay there, but he did. And when Jimin turned again, because of course he did, the distance between them closed naturally, like it always had. Not rushed, not planned, just natural. By the time the final set approached, the energy in the stadium had shifted again. It wasn't just excitement anymore, it was something deeper, something that settled into the chest and stayed there. The kind of feeling people don't always have words for, the kind that lingers long after the lights go out. And somewhere within all of that, the music, the cheers, the movement, there was that moment again, the one people would later talk about the most. It happened so simply. Jimin was walking across the stage, transitioning between positions, his focus forward. Jungkook was already standing near the center, waiting for his cue. For a split second, everything aligned, the timing, the spacing, the silence between beats. And Jimin turned, not because he had to, but because something in him chose to. His eyes found Jungkook instantly, like they always did. And this time, Jungkook didn't just look back, he held it. No smile, no movement, just presence, steady, certain, unwavering. And in that look, there was something that felt bigger than a concert, bigger than a moment, bigger than anything that could be explained in a single frame. Something quiet, something unspoken, something that didn't need confirmation to be felt. The music hit again, the lights shifted, the crowd roared. But for those who saw it, that second didn't disappear. It stayed, right there, lingering. The music surged back like a heartbeat returning after a pause, loud and undeniable. But even as the choreography snapped back into place and the stage filled with motion again, something had shifted, subtle, almost invisible, yet impossible to ignore for those who were paying attention. Because moments like that don't just disappear, they echo.
Jimin moved into the next formation, every step clean, every gesture controlled, but there was a lightness to him now. Not distraction, he was far too experienced for that, but a quiet kind of ease, like something inside him had settled exactly where it needed to be. Jungkook mirrored that same steadiness. From the outside, it was perfection as usual. Powerful vocals, sharp transitions, flawless synchronization. But underneath it, there was a rhythm that didn't belong to the music alone. It was theirs. As the setlist pushed toward its emotional peak, the stage design shifted again. The bright, explosive visuals faded into something softer, cool blues and dim golds washing over the stadium like a late-night sky. The crowd's energy followed, still intense, but quieter now, more focused, like everyone instinctively understood that something meaningful was unfolding. Jimin stepped forward, his voice carried into the silence between cheers. There was a vulnerability in the way he sang this part, less about perfection, more about feeling. His tone dipped softer at the ends of phrases, his breath audible in a way that made everything feel closer, more personal. And just behind him, Jungkook stood, a few steps behind at first, watching. Not the crowd, not the cameras, just Jimin. There was no choreography requiring it, no direction telling him to stay there, but he did. And when Jimin turned again, because of course he did, the distance between them closed naturally, like it always had. Not rushed, not planned, just natural. When his turn came, Jungkook stepped forward seamlessly, his voice blending into the melody with a richness that filled the entire space. The transition between them was smooth, effortless, but it was the space between their lines that caught attention. Jimin didn't step away immediately. He lingered, just half a second longer than necessary, close enough that the shared breath between verses felt intentional. Jungkook glanced at Jimin, not sharply, not suddenly, but with the familiarity of someone who didn't need to search. And again, there it was, that quiet understanding, that unspoken rhythm.
Somewhere in the crowd, fans were already reacting in real time, hands over their mouths, eyes wide, some laughing in disbelief, others frozen in that strange mix of joy and overwhelm. Because this wasn't scripted, or at least it didn't feel like it. There's a difference between choreography and connection, between timing and instinct, and what they were witnessing leaned unmistakably toward the latter. Phones captured everything, of course, screens glowing like constellations across the stadium, recording each second. But even then, there was a shared understanding among those watching, live. Some moments don't fully translate through a screen. You have to feel them. The next segment shifted the energy again. Faster beats, stronger choreography, the kind that demanded full focus and left no room for hesitation. Jimin and Jungkook fell back into precision instantly, bodies moving in perfect alignment with the music. But even here, in the most structured part of the performance, those small details remained. A glance timed just slightly off the beat, but perfectly on instinct. A step that aligned a little too naturally. A turn that seemed to anticipate the other without needing to check. At one point, during a rapid sequence where they crossed paths at center stage, their shoulders nearly brushed. It should have been just another transition, but Jimin's head tilted just slightly, Jungkook's hand flexed just once, and then they were past each other, already moving into the next formation. So quick, so easy, so familiar. As the final songs approached, the atmosphere grew heavier, not in a sad way, but in that deeply emotional sense that comes when something meaningful is about to end. The crowd's voices grew louder again, not just cheering, but singing along, holding on to every second. Jimin stood near the edge of the stage, looking out over the sea of lights. For a moment, he seemed to take it all in, the fans, the energy, the night itself. And then, almost unconsciously, he turned. Not searching, not hesitating, just turning. Jungkook was already there, closer this time. No distance between formations, no choreography dictating their positions, just two people standing in the same space, under the same lights, at the same moment. The music softened behind them, the instrumental carrying the weight of the final chorus. Jimin's expression shifted, gentler now, something reflective passing through his eyes. Jungkook's gaze met his without pause, and this time, neither of them looked away. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't exaggerated. If anything, it was incredibly simple. But that simplicity made it feel even realer, because there was no performance in it, no need to play it bigger for the crowd. Just a look, held, steady, honest. The final note rang out. The lights flared bright one last time before slowly dimming, the music fading into the echo of the crowd's cheers. Applause filled every corner of the stadium, loud and unrelenting, as the members stepped forward for their closing moments. Jimin bowed first, his smile warm, eyes slightly crinkled at the edges. Jungkook followed, his own expression soft but glowing with the adrenaline of the night. They moved side by side, waving, acknowledging fans, soaking in the energy that had carried them through the entire performance. But even now, even at the very end, there were still those moments. Jimin leaned slightly toward Jungkook as they walked, saying something too quiet for anyone else to hear. Jungkook laughed, quick, genuine, his shoulders relaxing just a little. Jimin's smile wider in response. And for a brief second, it felt less like the end of a concert and more like the continuation of something that existed far beyond it. Backstage, the noise returned in full force. Staff congratulating each other, equipment being moved, voices overlapping in a mix of relief and excitement. The high-pressure intensity of the performance dissolved into the organized chaos of post-show routines. Jimin stepped off the stage first this time, exhaling deeply as he passed the curtain. His posture loosened instantly, the shift from performer to himself happening in a way that felt almost physical. Jungkook followed just seconds later. For a moment, they were separated, staff moving between them, quick directions being exchanged, the usual rush of post-show activity. And then, that same stillness from earlier found its way back. Jimin slowed. Jungkook looked up, and just like before, their eyes met. No stage lights this time, no music, no audience, just the quiet hum of everything settling down. Jimin let out a soft laugh, almost like a release of everything he'd been holding in throughout the performance. Jungkook stepped closer, not rushed, not dramatic, just closer. "Good job," he said, voice low but clear enough to hear. Jimin nodded, his smile softer now, more personal. "You too." It was simple, almost too simple, but in that simplicity, there was something grounding, something that felt real in a way that no performance ever needed to be. And later that night, clips from the concert began to surface online. Short videos, slow-motion edits, zoomed-in frames capturing exact those moments. The glances, the pauses, the almost touch, the way they seemed to find each other without trying. Fans across the world reacted instantly. Some replayed the same few seconds over and over, trying to catch every detail. Others pointed out patterns, how this wasn't the first time, how similar moments had happened before, how there was a consistency to it that felt impossible to ignore. Others didn't analyze at all. They just felt it. Because sometimes the most powerful things aren't the ones you can fully explain. They're the ones you recognize without needing proof. What happened in El Paso that night wasn't something loud or obvious. There was no grand declaration, no moment designed specifically to go viral, no single action that demanded attention. Instead, it was made up of small things. A glance held a second longer, a turn that didn't need to happen but did, a presence that stayed constant even in the middle of chaos. And somehow, those small things became everything. Because they felt real, because they felt consistent, because they felt like something that existed whether anyone was watching or not. And maybe that's why it stayed with people, not just as a performance, but as a moment. A feeling, a quiet kind of story told not through words, but through instinct, timing, and something that seemed to exist just beneath the surface. Something that didn't ask to be noticed, but once seen, couldn't be unseen.
In the end, what fans took away from that night wasn't just the music or the choreography or even the scale of the concert itself. It was that one look, the one that felt like it stopped everything, the one that didn't need explanation, the one that turned a stadium of noise into something incredibly quiet, even if just for a second. Because sometimes the smallest moments carry the most weight, and sometimes all it takes is a single glance to say more than words ever could. If you felt that moment too, you're definitely not alone.